Welcome to First Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for everybody celebrating Christmas. I'm Rachel Wren, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University.
And I'm Rosie Candathol, a PhD candidate in Hebrew Bible at Emory University.
And I'm Tim McNinch, Assistant Professor of Hebrew Bible at Christian Theological Seminary. Yes, you heard that right. You have all three of us here because this is a party episode.
Yeah!
You might even say it's a Christmas party episode.
Yay!
Because
ding,
this
ding,
week
ding.
we're dealing with the lectionary text for Christmas, which is really exciting. And there's a couple big things happening right now. One is that we are going to be adventurous and talk about the New Testament reading in the lectionary. How's that for the Old Testament lectionary podcast?
I love it.
The other big news is that this is First Reading's 200th episode. So congratulations, you two.
Yeah, same to you.
Yay!
It's awesome.
Yes, this has been such an amazing adventure, going back more than 3 years now
Oh my
to
gosh.
the humble beginnings of First Reading, and now in our 200th episode glory.
That's
Here
so
we are.
crazy to think about. 3
wild.
years.
Yeah.
But we have not reached our peak until we had Rosie Candathol with us.
That's
and
true.
Hey.
It was all uphill grind, and then all of a sudden, the light shined in the darkness.
Oh my goodness! All the
that sounds
Christmas
like
illusions.
that sounds like a transition.
Let's go.
Well, this is a party episode, which means we're just shooting the breeze about the lectionary reading. And what is it this year? Is it Luke 2,
Luke
1
2
through
verses
something
1
or other?
1 through 20. It looks
1
like
through
yeah.
20, what it is every year, Tim. This is the
Yeah.
only thing that Christians should be reading on Christmas Eve.
All right then. So, hey, what do we want to talk about? What would be helpful for preachers and other lovers of the Bible who are thinking about looking into this text, and maybe from our angle, a little bit of Hebrew Bible resonance going on in this famous Luke text?
Well, I'll jump in. If we're going to look at maybe some Hebrew Bible allusions here that are in Luke chapter 2 that might be helpful for preachers and anyone who's interested to kind of think about, like in these very first verses, it's helpful to just listen to this language. So in those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered.
Hmm.
And this was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. So the first thing that kind of strikes me, which is also a Hebrew Bible allusion, is this structure of the empire that's sort of sovereign over this space. And so these first few verses really set up the power structure, the earthly power structure, at least that we're
Yeah.
looking at. And does this so there's this decree, right? So in the Greek, it's the dogma that goes out. The law that's there, and then Emperor Augustus, right? So Caesar Augustus, the great. All the world should be registered, and
Yeah,
all the
I love
world
that.
meaning here is Rome's idea of what all the world looks like, the civilized world that they have dominated.
Yeah.
And they're bringing in these folks for registration. Registration for the empire is about taxation, militarization. It's about keeping track of who your citizens are and ordering them into place. And so what we're seeing here with the kind of first story of the Holy Family is them responding to the law, coming to, everybody kind of moving into place because of what this law has ordered.
So what's the resonance that you're hearing there, Rosie, that draws your attention to that setting?
Right. So you all know that I'm working on Esther in my dissertation, right? And so Esther does a very similar thing in that it sets up this kind of like structure, overarching structure of empire. And then it starts talking about this smaller plot that is actually a revelation of how God is working. And so what I see in Luke 2 is a very similar structure where, we have a description of history and empire and what others might recognize, and then the kind of hidden truth that's underneath. And we begin the story of this pregnant woman and her betrothed, not even her husband, moving into Bethlehem. And then you get the kind of the hints of city of David, a son of David. And then you sort of hearing this, oh yes, right, the former king of Israel. So you're hearing the resonances of another story that's running in parallel. And Esther does a very similar thing. And I think you were also talking about resonances of registration with David.
Yeah. That's something that kind of struck me was and I'm trying to remember exactly where this is. This is in Chronicles somewhere, right? Maybe also in Second Kings. There's a parallel story of David at the end of his story. He also takes a census of the people of Israel, and it's bad news, right?
Yeah.
It's the wrong decision, and it results in divine judgment and plague and just terrible things happening. So there's this already sort of expectation within the traditional scriptures of the people of Israel that censuses by those in power for the purposes of taxation and militarization are they're a bad thing. It's sort of a fraught context, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and one of the interesting things that I've often found with my students is they're always like, well, why was it such a bad thing? What's going on in Second Chronicles there? Why was it such a terrible thing? The text isn't really clear. It's one of those times where we kind of have to try to divine what's going on in the divine mind, if you will.
Mm.
But I think what Rosie and Tim, what you're lifting up by connecting these two is the issue of control that's happening here. There is a definite move of empire to control all the world. I mean, I've always loved that the entire world should be registered. And I think there's a danger that this sets up right away, because what empire is trying to do is to literally control the narrative. And what the rest of Luke sets out to do is to almost offer a different narrative. We can even see that in the Greek here, because in these first three verses, the word registered, apographestai, apographe, and apographestai again, they occur three times. And you can hear that graphe, you can hear that, to write in the middle of that, because it's literally their name is written down. If you go back to the very beginning of Luke 1, verse 3, when Luke self-discloses the entire purpose of this gospel, it's that I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write
down,
an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. So there's this juxtaposition leading back to the empire of David that tried to take a census and control, and this two different purposes of writing, one for control, one for truth. And so I think there's an interesting play going on there.
Yeah, it also strikes me, just in talking about it with you guys now, this story is not set up as just sort of a subplot for a small people in some corner of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But we're already being set up to see this as a story that's going to, even though it centers in on one family and their adventure, it has implications for the whole world. This is being set up as a global story. It sort of reminds me, with my Hebrew Bible hat on, of the way that Genesis 12 is the story of one little family, Abram and Sarai and their family, but the context for it is Genesis 11, which is, Tower of Babel, and sort of this worldwide picture of things going on the global stage as they would have understood it. And then this one little story with this one family is set in that context, that it's going to have implications for everyone.
Oh, that's fantastic, especially because in Genesis 12, verse 4, you get, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So you've got the context of Babel, the context of empire here, the focus on one family, and yet the implication that intense attention to that singular family is ultimately going to bring about blessing for the entire world. There's a nice parallel there, Tim.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Rosie, you're helping to also bring out that this is set up in a kind of confrontation with the power and control of empire. Yeah. That there's another power at work here, a divine power.
Right, and we could talk about that language too, right? So, I mean, we're moving from this empire, and then this focus on this the singular family, the Holy Family, and then these messengers, right? So the angelos, the angels, as they're translated, but it might be helpful to just also be thinking about how the Greek word is actually, the messages of the empire. Those are the angelos, the ones who carry the messages of the king, right? So even what we're talking about here is the language is also moving to the real message is coming from a real king over all, and
Yeah.
this is the message. But to who is so fast, right? So we open up onto this story of the shepherds in a field at night watching over their animals, right? So shepherds should probably, for us as Hebrew Bible folks, like there should be some bulbs going off there
Ding,
too.
diddling, 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 ding.
Right. We have David the shepherd, Jacob the
Yeah.
shepherd, God the shepherd so much in the
Moses.
Psalms. Moses
the shepherd
right?
in Exodus 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So we're hearing this resonance there of, of these just kind of working class blue collar people who are being called to some sort of mission. And that's where these shepherds are. And that's who these messengers of the king are going to, not to the palace, not to the
Mhm.
temple, but to this field at night.
I think that's a really important point because I think I've heard and probably given a number of sermons that have really leaned into like these were the or maybe overemphasized even these were the outcasts of society. These were people that nobody wanted to be around. These were on the fringes of society. And it's like, well, shepherd in the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near Eastern context had really big royal overtones.
Mhm.
It was not just Moses, it was not just Jacob, it was not just David. It was these ancient Near Eastern kings who would self-identify as shepherds of their people. So I
Mhm.
think there's maybe almost some irony going on here that no,
Hmm.
literally these are actual shepherds. It's like a play going on this theme.
Yeah, I found as I was looking into this, Ezekiel 34 is a really interesting prophetic
Yeah,
chapter
nice.
about it's a kind of prophetic condemnation of the shepherds of the people
Yeah.
Right.
and how they've been leading God's flock astray. But the prophecy there is that God will bring a descendant of David to be the true shepherd of God's people.
Hmm.
And so maybe Luke's doing something with this idea of the heritage of David being a shepherd and
Yeah.
of the sort of prophetic resonances that were in the air about the need for a shepherd for God's people. And so
Mhm.
the angelos goes to shepherds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of play going on here. I mean, we could just take, angelos, and angels. Let's talk a little bit about angels in the Hebrew Bible, right? Like what are the instances you can think of just off the top of your head?
Yeah, angels and sort of terrifying angelic appearances. Genesis 16, Hagar encounters the messenger of God in the wilderness, and it's she says, "Whoa, I've seen God and lived."
Yeah.
Yikes!
Right.
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 Right. The angels coming to Abraham and Sarah and announcing Isaac's birth, and that very strange appearance there, where where Sarah's laughing. I mean, they're strange characters and they
Yeah.
often strike terror. So I mean, the
Yeah.
idea of these Christmas plays where the angels are these sort of sweet,
Yeah.
dressed in white. I mean, I can't imagine what these angels look like because I'm in the Greek, the language of their fear is really, it's like they feared with great fear.
Mhm.
It's they're trembling, terrified. So
Yeah,
I
in
don't
the
know what
Hebrew
they were
Bible,
just.
often the response to an encounter with the angel of God, the messenger of God, is falling on one's face in terror.
Yeah. Right. Right. No, I think
Right.
that's a great point to lift up the Greek there, Rosie, because there's a verb and then there's a fear and then there's a noun and then there's an adjective. So they feared fear greatly is basically what it
Right.
says there.
Like underscoring this is
Right.
not like comfortable.
Yeah.
This is terrifying. And
Yeah.
they're probably on their faces, like Tim is
Right.
describing. But the first word is don't be afraid.
Yeah.
That which implies that would be necessary to say.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's, we also get that if you're thinking again of nativity plays or Christmas plays, it's often like one angel who shows up to give the great news, or maybe a couple of angels. But this is, there's one here. And then in verse 13, suddenly there was with an angel, a multitude of the heavenly host. And that word host, I've grown up with in my mind as like a pretty word, like a choir sort of, like it's a bunch of people getting together. It's a nice word. And in both Greek and in Hebrew, what does that word actually mean, friends?
Armies. Like
Yeah,
soldiers.
it's an army.
Yeah.
This is an army. These are equipped for war.
Mhm.
And yet ironically, what this army is proclaiming is peace. I mean, there's just great deep, joyful play going on here between the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Greek, the Hebrew,
Mhm.
expectations. What is a host supposed to bring with it? A host is supposed to bring war, and this one brings with it a proclamation of peace. So it's all that empire turned upside down stuff going on.
Yeah, we're back to the theme of empire again, because
Yeah.
even though the on the ground you've got Caesar and this forced migration to hometowns for registration, and yet, and the if you just were to peel back the curtain a little bit, like
Mm.
we get in this theophany here, is all of a sudden there's another power, another empire, another force, an army at
Yeah.
work.
The curtain is sort of peeled back for a minute. I mean, I do think, we don't often talk about this as an apocalyptic text, and I wouldn't call it an apocalyptic text, but it is playing with some of those apocalyptic resonances where in, apocalyptic texts, you sort of peel back the curtain to
Yeah.
see what's really real.
If only you
Oh,
could see what's really going
yeah,
on here. Yeah.
exactly. So I think Luke is sort of playing with that as well.
I think what I love too is that despite all of the like evidence of control in this world, there's this unruly birth, of a woman who's not properly married. And
Yeah.
there's Luke is playing with this idea that there had always been rumors around Jesus's illegitimacy or whether or not his line could be, actually driven back to David or even Joseph. And here we have that sort of playing here where they're not married and the text is clear. She's pregnant. So
Yeah.
even today that might be, an issue for someone to think about. But here it is in the center of the story is this birth that cannot be
Yeah.
controlled. It cannot
Oh, I
be
love that.
it can't be
Mhm.
defined by law, not in the ways that we might expect.
Hold on. Just
Yeah,
repeat that
yeah.
again. The center of the story, at the center of this story is a birth that cannot be controlled. Like that's,
And I
man,
like that.
preachers just take that.
An
Like quote
unruly
Rosie
birth.
Candafill there. Yeah, an unruly birth. That's
And
fantastic.
to heap onto that would be the observation that, as the story says, first of all, as in sort of a passing comment, that there was no room in the living quarters or the inn or
Mhm.
whatever, and so the birth had to happen out, in the stable, in the manger.
Mm.
I wonder, given that this was a hospitality culture, it always surprises me that when the very pregnant Mary shows up to probably a relative's home where there's lots of people gathered, that they didn't just like make space for her in the living quarters
Mm.
and send the teenagers to go sleep in the stable. And I wonder if there's something about the scandal and stigma of her showing up as an unmarried pregnant woman
Mm.
that led to her having to take up residence in the stable area.
Yeah, and then for, the resonance throughout the Hebrew Bible of these kinds of births that are, secondary, like Hagar's is, we sort of mentioned that too.
Yeah.
That birth that is uncomfortable and can't be hosted in the main quarters, but kind of has to go to the margins. But here we are, like focused on this child in the manger, among the animals. There's all these beautiful hymns that kind of think
Yeah.
about Christ among these humble barn animals, that they would be the first witnesses of this birth, that creation in some
Yeah.
way is there
Oh.
first before humanity can even recognize who this child might be.
Oh, I love that. Especially, in Advent, we had the Isaiah text. What was the Isaiah something where it's they shall not hurt or harm on all my holy mountain. And it's all of these animals that
Mhm.
again are in relationship with a child. And I think I said this in a previous episode, but the adults are like off making war. And God's like, you go do that on my holy mountain, though. That's not going to be
Mm.
happening here. So it's almost like the manger is like a miniature holy mountain at the moment of Jesus's
Oh, that's
birth.
interesting. I think that might be Isaiah 10
Is it
ish.
10? I'll
Ish.
look it up. 11. Nicely done.
11's
10-ish.
10ish.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
that-
you know what? It actually occurs twice. Interesting. It occurs in Isaiah 11 verse 9 and Isaiah 65 verse 25.
The other thing that caught my attention about the manger is how when it first comes through the story, it's just mentioned like in passing, like it's just a little minor detail of the story that doesn't deserve explanation or extra comment. And if you're going quickly, it just kind of goes past,
Yeah.
and you might think, "What was that?" But
Hmm.
then the story keeps going, and when the hosts are there giving praise to God for this amazing birth, the angel says to the shepherds, this will be a sign for you. You'll find a
Ah.
baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, this little passing comment becomes a prophetic
Sign.
sign.
Huh.
And I always sort of just thought that that was like, here's how you'll know which is the right baby. But, signs
Mhm.
they have meaning to them. They have significance to them. So
Yeah.
it's more than just like the name tag for how to find this particular baby. There's
Right.
something meaningful in that the Savior who's to be born you'll find
Huh.
him lying in a manger. Just
Huh.
raises again the power of the juxtaposition between the power of empire and the marginality of this Savior who has come.
That's beautiful. You know what else it lifts up is I wonder if there's again a literary juxtaposition of where at the end of Jesus's life he's taken down from the cross, he's wrapped in cloths and he's laid in a tomb. And if
Mm.
that's part of what the sign resonance is carrying here, because I think you're right, Tim. I had always thought of it as like a stop here, like a name tag, like you said. But
Mm-hmm.
if we really take that word seriously, semeion in Greek carries a lot of weight to it. I wonder if there's a foreshadowing happening here as well.
Mm.
That yeah, this is no ordinary child, and the life will be no ordinary life either.
Yeah, that sounds very Lucan. Luke
Yeah.
peppers in all sorts of sort of like, if you read this carefully, there's something
That's
deep
right.
going on here.
Mhm.
And often it has to do with voices that pop up from the margins.
Nice.
Luke really tends to highlight those. We're ramping up into the end of our time here. Other thoughts or I didn't really come up with any specific preaching angles, but if you have some sort of parting thoughts of what preachers might take from this.
I mean, I'm in Georgia right now, and we just kind of had this crazy runoff election. We were waiting in lines to
Yeah.
vote, and there was a lot of resonance for me as I was thinking about the lines for registration and what we
Hmm.
might think is the most important election,
Huh.
over here, and then possibly another reality. I don't know, like, and that kind of helped restore the mystery of we don't ever really know, and I think all of us struggle with control. So for me,
Hmm.
this unruly birth at the center reminds me of, I might be trying to do all these things in this season, but I need a reminder of the fact that we treasure the the unpredictable in the Christian life.
Mm.
The not predictable, like you really cannot see this coming. It just is the
Yeah.
surprise. And for me at least, it's just reminding me that that is one of the essences of Advent is we wait for something we really don't know,
Mm.
and but we hope, And so I don't know. That's kind of where I was in terms of landing on some sort of preaching point here in Georgia,
Mm.
where I am. Yeah.
Nice. How about you, Tim?
I don't know. I've in our conversation here, I've been struck by the sort of apocalyptic flavor of
Mm.
this chapter. Like there aren't very many of these sort of like sky peels back and there's a
Mm.
heavenly army like that doesn't feel like a particularly New Testament
Yeah.
narrative vibe. So there is something going on here of a sneak peek behind the scenes
Yeah.
that I think is to me that's poignant about the Christmas celebration that here we take a moment in the annual cycle of chaos that we live through to pause and to just reflect on something that's happening behind the scenes, behind what
Mm.
is seen. And just like in Luke, after this, that layer that's been pulled back gets replaced,
Yeah.
and the story continues on this really sort of small scale
Yeah.
of following this one family through. And yeah, I think that maybe there's some potential there for helping congregations to pause and reflect that there's more going on than the day-to-day chaos of life
Mm.
in this weird world would let
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So it really kind of to sit for a bit with that good news of great joy for all people. Like
Mm.
really sitting there of not only the here in our time good news of great joy for all people, but in the heavenly realm, in the future realm, that's there's a yeah, resonance to this story that echoes in ways we don't even really understand. And pausing on that could be a really beautiful moment on Christmas.
And, from the Old Testament Lectionary podcast, it's worth just sort of closing out by reminding folks that all of these themes that we've been talking about, these deep meanings that are embedded in Luke 2, are not just isolated to Luke 2. They're a part of the biblical witness as a whole.
Yeah.
And so, as much as you can, liturgists and preachers draw in these Hebrew Bible texts into your celebration of Christmas, because they're all a part of that larger resonance of what God's doing.
They are. And maybe I could end us on an Old Testament note just very briefly.
If you must.
If I must.
So I'll allow it.
So the name of Jesus's, what would it be, cousin, uncle, whatever it is Zechariah. And of course, there's an Old Testament book called Zechariah. And one of my favorite things to notice is the resonances between the book of Luke, especially the first 2 chapters, and the book of Zechariah. And one of my very favorites is Zechariah 14, verses 20 to 21. And what these 2 verses do is they describe holiness so pervasive that it resides in the very most basic, most unexpected places of life. The holiness of God in this apocalyptic world extends out from the temple and infects everything around it with holiness. So these 2 verses say, on that day, there shall be inscribed on the bells of the horses, holy to the Lord, the horses themselves, which were also war machines, right? So if we're talking about war and that sort of thing. And then it goes on, and the cooking pots in the house of the Lord shall be as holy as the bowls in front of the altar. So cooking pots in the house of the Lord. But then it goes even farther. And every cooking pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holy to the Lord of hosts, so that all who sacrifice may come and use them to boil the flesh of the sacrifice. The regular, ordinary cooking bowls of Jerusalem shall give and carry holiness. And in this text, the regular, ordinary body of a mother carries and gives holiness. And that holiness, in the form of a regular, ordinary person, carries and gives holiness to everyone around him as he walks through his life. So I would just highlight what you said, Tim, like draw on those Old Testament resonances to bring to life this text that we've heard so many times.
That's beautiful, Rachel. And I'm going to forget all of that except for the jingle bells on the horses. That I think is the point that I'll take with me for this season. Yeah,
it's amazing.
Okay, friends. Well, I think we should wrap up this party episode, this party 200th episode of the First Reading Podcast. Thank you both for this really fascinating conversation into a New Testament text. We should do this more often.
That was fun.
I agree.
Awesome.
Okay, friends. Well, thank you all for listening, and especially to those of you out there who have been listening for 200 episodes worth of this.
Thanks, moms.
Yeah, thanks, Mom.
If you have not gotten a Christmas gift for anybody yet, might I recommend sharing the link to our podcast, perhaps sharing a mug of First Reading. There's even a t-shirt. So, if you're looking for last minute gifts, firstreadingpodcast.com merchandise is the way to go.
We've got you covered.
Well, thank you all of you out there for being a part of this podcast community. We look forward to being with you next time when we get back to the Hebrew Bible proper. And until then, I'm Tim McNinch.
I'm Rachel Wren.
And I'm Rosie Candital.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
God bless us, everyone.
Wait, that's my line.
Terrible.
Tim,
It's Tiny Tim.
Terrible.
Say it.
God bless us, everyone.
Yes, even with the voice. That was amazing.
No.